Hello learners, I welcome you all to another session of the course MSD 019 Global Strategies to Sustainable Development. And the topic of today's discussion will be SDG 15 and its linkages with other SDGs. So the learning outcomes, if we talk about for today's session, they will be Sustainable Development Goal 15, linkage of SDG 15 with SDG 1 and SDG 2, linkage of SDG 15 with SDG 6, linkage of SDG 15 with SDG 7, linkage between SDG 15 and SDG 11, linkage of SDG 15 with SDG 12, linkage of SDG 15 with SDG 13, linkage of SDG 15 with SDG 17, trade-offs, and let us sum up. So first of all, we have to learn what is biodiversity. The biodiversity is basically the variety and the variability of various life forms which are present on the earth, and they play a very important fundamental role in ecosystem functioning and therefore helps in delivery of various ecosystem benefits which are linked to the human well-being. If we talk about the 80% of human diet is provided by the plants. More than 80% of the terrestrial species depend on the forest habitats, and they occupy 30% of the planet's surface. Forests, they act as an important source for clean air, water, medicines, and offer promising solutions in mitigating climate change. The value of ecosystem services which are provided to the human well-being, it is calculated at around 125 trillion US dollar. At the same time, mountains provide home to 12% of the human population worldwide, and biodiversity forms the basis of ecosystem functions and services. If we talk about SDG 15, that is life on land, it basically aims to protect, restore, promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems. It aims at sustainably managing the forest, combating the desertification, and halting and reversing land degradation along with the loss of the biodiversity. If we talk about the major aims of Sustainable Development Goal 15, it aims to safeguard or reinstate, encourage sustainable use of terrestrial and freshwater ecosystems, sustainable management of forest. At the same time, it conserves the mountain ecosystems, fight the process of desertification, and aims to stop and reverse the land degradation along with halting or reversing the loss of the biodiversity. It aims to integrate the ecosystem and biodiversity into the planning process and the developmental process. And at the same time, it strategizes for the reduction of poverty and inclusion of the ecosystem values into the national accounts. SDG 15 promotes fair sharing of benefits which are obtained by the various genetic resources and access to the various biological resources. It prevents poaching and illegal trade of protected flora and fauna. This SDG or the goal, it contains 12 targets, 15 indicators, and 3 means of implementation, and all these targets, they have to be achieved by the year 2030. If we talk about the linkage between SDG 15 and SDG 1, that is no poverty, and SDG 2, that is zero hunger. So if we talk about the historical perspective, 7,000 species of plants, they have been cultivated for consumption in all throughout the human history. The great diversity and varieties resulting from human and ecosystem interaction guaranteed food for the survival and development of human populations. Plant biodiversity basically includes the crops, livestock, which have been purposefully introduced and maintained in an ecosystem known as agroecosystem by the farmer. Presently, 30 crops provide 95% of the human food energy needs, and out of that Four major crops are rice, wheat, maize and potato. And altogether these four crops, they form 60% of the energy intake. Plant genetic resources, they form the basis of the food security in human beings, and they consist of diversity of seeds, planting material of traditional varieties and modern cultivars which rose from the wild relatives of the various plant species. If we talk about the linkage between SDG 15 and SDG 6, that is clean water and sanitation, so forests play a pivotal role in maintaining the hydrological cycle. Forests, through the process of evapotranspiration, they add water vapors into the atmosphere, and when they cool down, they fall off on the ground in the form of rain. So we can eventually say that trees help in bringing the rainfall. At the same time, the evapotranspiration process help in regulating the temperature through the cooling effect. Trees help in groundwater recharge through soil infiltration. Along with this, precipitation makes its way through forest and get converted in the form of groundwater, and to runoff it get converted into the surface water, which flows into the streams and then eventually into the rivers. We talk about the linkage between SDG 15 and SDG 7. So if we talk about the electricity, all throughout the world we can see the pattern that the consumption and the access to electricity, it has increased from 79% in the year 2000 to 85% in 2012. And urban residents, they are the major beneficiaries to this access to electricity. And this major revolution has taken place especially in the countries of Southern Asia, Southeast Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. Modern renewable energy sources such as hydropower, geothermal energy, solar energy, wind energy, biogas, they form 60% of the power generation in the year 2014. If we talk about the SDG 7, which ensures the clean energy through non-polluting sources, eventually it benefits the forest, the biodiversity and the wildlife. Here we can say that when people use more wood as the fuel, definitely they harm the forest, and that leads to cutting of the forest. When we switch over to non-polluting sources of energy, eventually that will lead to conservation of the forest and the habitat of various kinds of biodiversity which is present in them. Then we shall also discuss the trade-offs which are linked between these two SDGs. First one is the weak valuation of ecosystem services of the biodiversity. Second one is the bioenergy production. It basically employs the byproducts of agriculture and forestry, while some may cultivate exotic species for biofuel production. This will lead to introduction of exotics in a specific area, and that will eventually cause the problem which are related to exotics and also to invasive alien species. We also know what are the negative impacts of the dams on the biodiversity, especially when we construct large scale dams or the hydropower projects. There we can see the reservoirs which are formed because of large scale or these hydropower projects. They will submerge the forest, and that eventually leads to the loss of biodiversity. Solar energy, it is another renewable source of energy, and it is promoted all throughout the world. But at the same time, it has been reported that solar farms especially hamper the nesting and breeding grounds of many faunal species. Wind farms, they basically impact the fauna by causing habitat loss and also deviation of the migratory routes of various birds. If we talk about linkage between SDG 15 and SDG 11, that is sustainable cities and communities. So here we can see that it is projected that 60% of world population will reside in urban areas by the year 2030. And as the urban population it is increasing, so is the pollution load, specifically the air pollution. The urban residents, they are subjected to high load of urban air pollution, which is affecting their life and which is causing various kinds of respiratory diseases such as asthma, bronchitis and so on. So if we talk about the urban trees and the green spaces which are part and parcel of urban planning, a mature tree, it is estimated to take up 22 kilograms of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and at the same time it releases the oxygen during the process of photosynthesis. Every year 1.3 million trees, they remove 2,500 tons of pollutants from the air. At the same time, trees help in rainwater infiltration, thus increasing the groundwater level in urban areas, and also play an important role in decreasing or thwarting the urban heat island effect. They also help in flood management in urban areas. If we talk about the trade-offs, then the migration of more people in the urban areas will eventually lead to the loss of traditional knowledge and practices. This can be seen that urban people, they don't have much knowledge about the various species of plants and animals which are present in their surroundings, and what are the benefits or uses of these plants and animal species which are present in the surroundings. So this loss of traditional knowledge and practices eventually can lead to the loss of biodiversity and also lead to homogenization of the biodiversity, where some specific species, because of their ornamental use and also along with some exotics, they are promoted in urban areas. Rather than we shall concentrate on the various native species which are part and parcel of the ecosystem and also help in nurturing the biodiversity, the various fauna which includes the species of birds and animals, they depend upon the native tree species. If we grow them in the urban environment, they will provide various kinds of ecosystem services. At the same time, increase in urban areas, they have detrimental effect on environment and the biodiversity. As the urban expansion, it is taking place in all throughout the world, we can see that it is generally taking place at the expanse of forest or agricultural lands. The agricultural lands, they are getting converted into the forest, which leads to eventually loss of agrobiodiversity. And when the forests, they are converted into the urban areas, that also leads to the loss of biodiversity. Then we shall talk about the linkage between the SDG 15 and SDG 12, that is sustainable consumption and production. So if we talk about sustainable production and consumption pattern, then that will lead to minimization of the waste generation and reduce dependence on the natural resources, and at the same time less amount of toxic material it is produced. So less amount of pollution it is liberated, and the burden on the natural resources, it will be reduced. If the biodiversity and available resources are properly managed by the farmers, the productions at the farms, that can be increased, and this will eventually lead to reduction in poverty and help in achievement of the food security. At the same time, reducing wasteful practices of production and consumption will help in better resource management, specifically of the natural resources. If we see what are the trade-offs which are involved here, one major problem in the way of sustainable consumption and production is consumer demand. And as the consumer demand, it is increasing, so the pressure on natural resources, it is also increasing at the same time. And to achieve the growing demands, the goods may be produced in other countries, and so the problem won't be solved. It gets switched over from one nation to another nation, or from one region to another region. Next, we will talk about the linkage of SDG 15 with SDG 13, that is climate action. So, the forest and the biodiversity, they are linked to the controlling of the climate change. As we all know that climate change has emerged as a major threat to our planet Earth. So, and the major factor behind this is the release of various greenhouse gases, especially from various anthropogenic activities. So, forests, they act as the sink of carbon dioxide, as they remove the carbon dioxide during the process of photosynthesis and help in ensuring the long-term storage of carbon. Thus, they play an important role in carbon sequestration. With the aim of reducing disaster risk, countries have developed and implemented payments for ecosystem services through various kinds of schemes such as REDD+, which is known as reducing emission from deforestation and forest degradation. At the same time, around $10.3 billion fund in the form of Green Climate Fund has been diverted to promote REDD+. If we talk about the forest, they help in restricting the temperature. This has been proven by the studies that urban green cover, if it is increased by 10%, it restricts the increase of temperature by 1 degree centigrade. Mangrove forests, they are known for high sequestration rate for carbon, and their destruction can lead to increase of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Similarly, wetlands, they play a very important role in carbon sequestration. Nature-based solution, they must be incorporated in the national level planning so that climate control measures can be taken up effectively and climate situation can be controlled. If we talk about the trade-offs, so bioenergy measures which include the carbon capture and storage, they have been taken up by various countries, which include the establishment of various kinds of plantations. And under these plantation programs or afforestation schemes, large number of trees, they are planted in an area to store the carbon. But they remove the carbon dioxide, but at the same time, many of these species, tree species, they are alien invasive species. For example, eucalyptus plantations, they have been established in many parts of the world, but eucalyptus is an alien invasive species. So eventually that can also have detrimental effect on the biodiversity. If we talk about linkage between the SDG 15 and SDG 17, so SDG 17, it basically talks about the global partnership for achieving all the SDGs. SDG 15 is also linked with SDG 17, as the global partnership is necessary between the governments, private sector and the local communities to hamper the biodiversity loss and also to include the biodiversity and the ecosystem services in the gross domestic product. Various kinds of international agreements, they are already in place to ensure that SDG 15 and the biodiversity of the region, they can be protected. For example, we have Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora, which is known as CITES, which deals with the wildlife trade which is there all throughout the globe, and it promotes the sustainable use of the biodiversity. Nagoya Protocol is there on the access and benefit sharing under the Convention on Biological Diversity, which focuses on management to avoid over-exploitation of natural resources. New York Declaration on Forest is another treaty which is there in place, and similarly we have Consumer Goods Forum and Equator Principles, which is related to the risk management framework. Now we will talk about the trade-offs which are linked here. The trade-offs are limited if SDG 15 and SDG 17, they are both effectively implemented. At the same time, effective governance is essential for achieving both SDG 15 and SDG 17. Efforts to achieve the targets of SDG 17 will encourage good governance, and then eventually that will have positive impact on achievement of SDG 15. So in the end, let us summarize what we had learned in today's session. SDG 15 aims to protect, restore and promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems. SDG 15 is linked with SDG 1 and SDG 2 as the great diversity and varieties resulting from human and ecosystem interactions guarantee food for the survival and development of human populations. Forests help in maintaining the hydrological cycle and thus assures provisioning of fresh water and help in achievement of SDG 6. As the SDG 7 talks about the clean energy through non-polluting sources, it ultimately leads to a better health and well-being of people, conserving biodiversity, forest and wildlife. Sustainable management of cities through green spaces is very important and helps in attaining both SDG 11 and SDG 15. Forests and wetlands help in carbon sequestration and thus help in attainment of both SDG 13 and SDG 15. All the SDGs can be achieved through partnership between government, private, civil and local communities. Thank you so much.